Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Cannibal Corpse Chaos Horrific, out September 22nd on Metal Blade Records. The album has 10 tracks, 39 minutes in length, and this is the band's 16th full-length studio album. They are an American death metal band. From a design point of view, I felt like this album was very compact, very narrow in its path. It has a forward motion, it's fluid in terms of the direction that it takes, but it's not a dynamic record at all. It stays very consistent with the experience sung in and sung out. There are a few nuances here and there that slightly change the attributes of songs, but they kind of get lost in the overall repetitiveness of this album. So it's an interesting structure, but it's a structure that's really dictated by the sound experience and consistent sound experience, and also by the length of the album itself. As far as that sound goes, density is the best word to describe. This is a thick, heavy, brutal sounding album, and it feels like that was the direction. Instead of focus on how many ways we can use or display that brutality, they just rather concentrating on making the record as brutal as possible. When you start to look at that way towards an album, you kind of create a funnel vision as far as the sound is concerned. And when you do that, you definitely leave room for repetitiveness, or at least you leave room for songs to have similar attributes. And when songs start to have similar attributes, it becomes a lot harder to distinguish the individual qualities of each and every single song. So you can look at the overall record and say that the album is a strong record, but it's harder to look at the individual tracks and tell you exactly what each one of them did to the overall experience of listening to the album. And that has the impact of having the sound just focus on this one element. Now, there are some interesting elements within the sound on this record. I want to start off with the drums, for example. The drums on this album really felt like they had a bigger impact at the bottom end of the sound rather than at the top end of the sound. And that doesn't mean that the drums are just in the back end of the experience. They are there and they're really noticeable in that spot, but they also move up. The problem when they move up is that they match up with the guitar sound. And the guitar sound on this record overshadows almost everything else. It's really predominant. A lot of the brutality, a lot of the heaviness, I would say the vast majority of the brutality and heaviness of this record, outside of the vocal performance, obviously, it's really coming from this thick, dense guitar sound. And when you have that at the top, it doesn't matter what else you're infusing into that sound, that you just don't see it coming through. So the only way you really notice the drums and notice them well is on the bottom end where the guitars are voided. So you see the guitar sound more up front, more up top, creating this volume, creating this density, creating this brutality and aggression. You see the drums reaching there but then dissipating within, and then you find them having a little bit more control of their own environment at the bottom end. The bass, for example, on this record plays a role, and it's impactful in a few songs. For example, Overlords of Violence, the opening track, starts off with a great bass intro. I almost wish they did more of that, not necessarily using the bass as an intro all the time, but would be super cool to have some bass bridges here and there, or at least allow the bass a little bit more in the mix. It was, to me, a little bit too far in order for it to really have a defining factor, or being a defining factor and having a defining impact on this album. I think having it a little bit more forward would ease off the guitars being so far up top, and it would bridge better the drum sound with that guitar sound, creating a little bit more of a harmony within the heaviness. Not just creating a super brutal sound, but creating a brutal sound that also has texture to it. This album is a little bit devoid of that, in my opinion. When it comes to the vocal performance, is business as usual. Corpse Grinder is true to himself. I don't feel like this is an overly dynamic record vocally. There are a few elements here and there, some reverb here, some reverb there, some different styles, some different approaches, some different tonality, but overall it is Corpse Grinder from beginning to end. What you get at the first note is what you're going to get all the way through the record. He adds that Cannibal Corpse touch, that Cannibal Corpse DNA that we've gotten familiar with over the years now, and adds also to that overall brutality that the record has. It's almost like he's trying to take the overall brutality of the album from 10 and turn it all the way to 11 on an album that's already pushing that 11 consistently from start to end. So a consistent performance by him. I wasn't expecting anything less. Now, as far as the overall record, the overall feel of this album, you guys know I don't rank records and I don't give them numbers, but I gotta say that this album left me slightly disappointed. I feel like it's the perfect, maybe perfect is not the right way either. It's the logical. This is the logical segue from the previous record. I feel like this album really hones in on everything the previous album started to create for the band, as far as that predominance on the guitar sound, as far as that brutality, as far as that intensity. But it loses a little bit of what Cannibal Corpse had on previous records. So when you look at the last 10 years, this is perhaps my least favorite album from them. Not that it doesn't have great songs, it does have some really incredible songs in it, but overall as a record, it just doesn't really feel, sound, or leave you this impression of being a memorable album down the line. Time will tell, but as of right now, this is not one that I'm excited to listen to time in and time out. As far as favorite songs goes, I really have to start off with the opening track, Overlords of Violence, and it's because of that bass. Here you have a nuance that I talked earlier. Some songs having a little bit of nuances, but not being a dynamic record. This song has that. It opens up the album with bass, it opens up the song with bass. That sets the track apart from all the other tracks on the album because no other song does that. And I think this album needed more elements like this. At the beginning, at the end, in between, somewhere, somehow infusing the album with these elements adds spice. It creates changes. It allows your brain to pick up the differences of the songs and not concentrate on the things that bring them together, the things that they have in common. So this track stayed immediately in my brain as one of the best songs of the record because of how it starts with a simple bass line, but one that works really well. Now, this track has a lot of different moving pieces, and they're all moving in parallel to one another. And I really like that sense of not compressing everything, but rather giving you everything in different layers. Now, I also like the way this song leads you into the guitar solo. The lead into the guitar solo, the guitar sound, the experience, the sonic experience that moment gives you has some technical elements to it, has some proggy elements to it, and now you have a track that has two nuances that really set this track apart. Now, once you get into the solo feels very old school death metal, very traditional, and it fits in the track perfectly, but it doesn't break away from everything else that's happening on the album or even other solos on the record. This song sets itself apart because of how it starts with the bass, that lead into the solo that has a different aroma, easier to digest, really poppable, and that breaks away from the density of the song and the overall brutality that it has. The other track that I really enjoyed, and it's in my top 3, is Chaos Horrific. This is a bigger sounding track, and that is perhaps the nuance that this song offers. It doesn't really change a lot from its predecessors, from the songs that come after. This album has a lot of songs that have that big sound experience. They're not just heavy, they're big, a lot of volume behind it. But I like the way the drums define the volume on this track a little bit better. Instead of the guitars creating density, and with that density comes volume, on this track I felt like the drums played a bigger role in creating that perspective. It still allows the track to be heavy, to be brutal, and continually to be dense, but at least it has a better sense of shape. Now, vocally, the chorus has some layers. Once again, adding a little nuance. The vocals in the chorus are not straightforward, perhaps more straightforward in the verses, but when it gets to the chorus, there are some backing vocals that add some layers and definitely gives a different experience and allows your ears to perk up and for you to pay a little bit more attention to the track itself. A song that has these slight eternal ebbs and flows, but outside of that, the solo section sounds great, has an impact but falls in line with other solo sections. So it comes down to the drum sound and the impact of the drum sound on this specific song, and then how the vocal pattern changes considering other tracks once it comes into the chorus. Last but definitely not least, actually last song on the record, Drain You Empty. Now, this song spoke up to me because I felt like it was a little bit more dynamic vocally than the rest of the album. When you look at all 10 songs, I honestly feel like this is the one where you see a little bit more movement vocally and not just keeping pace with the mobility of the song, with the fluidity of the song. This allows the sound to also feel slightly more dynamic in its movement. It's creating 3 different lanes and you're shifting continuously between them. That's the experience that this track puts forward, changing the eyesight of the listener throughout the experience of listening to the song. This makes you almost constantly reset where you are within the track without losing track of the track itself and the heaviness that it provides. Offering an underlying melody, really cool on the guitar side, then offering a chugging forward thick motion also from the guitars, and then also having this heavy wall of sound that kind of blends it all together, or it allows everything to coexist with one another. Really interesting track to close off the album, because to me it was definitely a song that both musically and vocally was completely different from anything else this record had in store for me. Alright, let me know your thoughts on Cannibal Corpse Chaos Horrific out September 22nd. Hit me up in the comment section. I'll be seeing your comments, getting back to you, and we'll see each other in the next video.